Hello and g'day. This video is a poetry reading and it's a famous Australian poem called The Man from Snowy River, and I found this poem on a public or domain poetry website, and it's written by a man called Banjo Paterson. Now, during this video, I'm going to be chewing some gum, and I'll put that up the right way. I've got some PK chewing gum, which is a Wrigley's gum, and I'll pop out a couple of cubes. And there goes the second one. And yes, I'll be chewing a bit of gum whilst I read this poem called The Man from Snowy River. Now, this poem, as I said before, was written by a man called Banjo Paterson. His real name was Andrew Barton, but he rode under the pseudonym Banjo Paterson. So, if you talk to somebody in Australia and you mentioned Banjo Paterson, everybody would know who you're talking about, or nearly everybody. But if you mentioned Andrew Barton, not many people would recognise the name Andrew Barton. Anyway, I'll just give you a few little facts about Banjo Paterson before I start the poem. So, Banjo Paterson, his parents came from Scotland, or at least his father did, and he was born in 1864 on a farm near Orange in New South Wales in Australia. And so he practiced as a solicitor. He must have, after leaving school, he must have studied to become a solicitor. And but after being a solicitor for a while, he became a war correspondent, and he went to the Boer War and covered the war for the Sydney Morning Herald and the Age. And the Age is sort of the Victorian version of the Sydney Morning Herald, or the Melbourne version of the Sydney Morning Herald. And and obviously, while he was a solicitor, he enjoyed writing, and he wrote this great poem, among other things. They were published. His poems were published in the Bulletin, which was a magazine that was around for a long time. It's now defunct, but it was around for a long time. Was the Bulletin, and that's where he published his poems. There's a number of poems that he wrote. Now Banjo Paterson, he was so famous in Australia that his face portrait is on the $10 note, and in small print it says Banjo Paterson, which is his not his real name, but his pseudonym. And there's a photo of him, a picture of him, with a hat on and his collar and tie and suit on the Australian $10 note. Okay, I'll put that $10 note to one side, and I guess now is time to start reading the poem. Now, I'll just give a little bit of an overview of what the poem's about. It's set in the Snowy Mountains, which is in New South Wales, and also they go into Victoria, the Snowy Mountains, and that's pretty well the only place that it snows. Well, people people ski anyway. In Australia it does snow, in other parts, but not that often. And it's all about a horse that escapes from this farm, and there was a big reward for capture of the horse. I think there was a reward, and everybody gathers, all the stockmen from the farms, stations, which farms are called stations, or stations are called farms. No, I think farms are called stations in Australia. That's the right way around. And and then they finally catch the horse, and it was about the fabulous riding of one particular stockman to catch that horse. So anyway, that's a bit of an overview of Banjo Paterson, an overview of the poem, and there's nothing else left but start reading the poem. Okay, The Man from Snowy River by Banjo Paterson. Starting from the top line. There was movement at the station, for the word had passed around that the colt from Old Regret had got away and joined the wild bush horses. He was worth £1,000. So all the cracks had gathered to the fray. All the tried and noted riders from the stations near and far had mustered at the homestead overnight. For the bushmen love hard riding, where the wild bush horses are, and the stock horse snuffs the battle with delight. There was Harrison, who made his pile, when Pardon won the cup, the old man with his hair as white as snow. But few could ride beside him. When his blood was fairly up, he would go wherever horse and man could go. And Clancy of the Overflow came down to lend a hand. No better horseman ever held the reins, for never horse could throw him while the saddle girths would stand. He learnt to ride while droving on the plains. And one was there, a stripling, with a small and weedy beast. He was something like a racehorse undersized, with a touch of Timor pony, 3 parts thoroughbred at least, and such as are by mountain horsemen prized. He was hard and tough and wiry, just the sort that won't say die. There was courage in his quick, impatient tread, and he bore the badge of gameness in his bright and fiery eye, and the proud and lofty carriage of his head. But still so slight and weedy, one would doubt his power to stay, and the old man said, that horse will never do. For a long and tiring gallop, lad, you'd better stop away. These hills are far too rough for such as you. So he waited, sad and wistful. Only Clancy stood his friend. I think we ought to let him come, he said. I warrant he'll be with us when he's wanted at the end, for both his horse and he are mountain bred. He hails from Snowy River, up by Kosciuszko's side, where the hills are twice as steep and twice as rough, where a horse's hoofs strike firelight from the flint stones every stride. The man that holds his own is good enough. And the Snowy River riders on the mountains make their home, where the river runs those giant hills between. I have seen full many horsemen since I first commenced to roam, but nowhere yet such horsemen have I seen. So he went. They found the horses by the big mimosa clump. They raced away towards the mountain's brow, and the old man gave his orders. Boys, go at them from the jump. No use to try for fancy riding now. And Clancy, you must wheel them. Try and wheel them to the right. Ride boldly, lad, and never fear the spills. For never yet was rider that could keep the mob in sight, if once they gain the shelter of those hills. So Clancy rode to wheel them. He was racing on the wing, where the best and boldest riders take their place. And he raced his stock horse past them, and he made the rangers ring with the stock whip as he met them face to face. Then they halted for a moment while he swung the dreaded lash, but they saw their well-loved mountain full in view, and they charged beneath the stock whip with a sharp and sudden dash, and off into the mountain scrub they flew. Then fast the horsemen followed, where the gorges deep and black resounded to the thunder of their tread, and the stock whips woke the echoes, and they fiercely answered back from cliffs and crags that beetled overhead. And upward, ever upward, the wild horses held their way, where mountain ash and currajong grew wide, and the old man muttered fiercely, we may bid the mob good day, no man can hold them down the other side. When they reached the mountain summit, even Clancy took a pull. It might make the boldest hold their breath. The wild hop scrub grew thickly, and the hidden ground was full of wombat holes, and any slip was death. But the man from Snowy River let the pony have his head, and he swung his stock whip round and gave a cheer, and he raced him down the mountain like a torrent down its bed, while the others stood and watched in very fear. He sent the flintstones flying, but the pony kept his feet. He cleared the fallen timber in his stride, and the man from Snowy River never shifted in his seat. It was grand to see that mountain horseman ride through the stringy barks and saplings on the rough and broken ground. Down the hillside at a riding pace he went, and he never drew the bridle till he landed safe and sound at the bottom of that terrible descent. He was right among the horses as they climbed the further hill, and the watchers on the mountainside, standing mute, saw him ply the stock whip fiercely. He was right among them still, as he raced across the clearing in pursuit. Then they lost him for a moment, where two mountain gullies met in the ranges, but a final glimpse reveals. On a dim and distant hillside, the wild horses racing yet, with the man from Snowy River at their heels. And he ran them single-handed till till their sides were white with foam, he followed like a bloodhound on their track, till they halted cowed and beaten. Then he turned their heads for home, and alone and unassisted brought them back. But his hardy mountain pony, he could scarcely raise a trot. He was blood from hip to shoulder from the spur. But his pluck was still undaunted, and his courage fiery hot, for never yet was mountain horse a cur. And down by Kosciuszko, where the pine-clad ridges raise their torn and rugged battlements on high, where the air is clear as crystal, and the white stars fairly blaze at midnight in the cold and frosty sky, and where around the overflow the reed beds sweep and sway to the breezes, and the rolling plains are wide. The man from Snowy River is a household word today, and the stockmen tell the story of his ride. Okay, that's the end of the poem, The Man from Snowy River. It's quite it's a poem I suppose you've got to read a number of times to really, get into it and really enjoy. So, yeah, hopefully, if you didn't quite get it all the first time, you can watch this video again and again, and really get into this great Australian poem, which is called The Man from Snowy River by Banjo Paterson. Okay, well, I hope that you've enjoyed this video. I hope you found it relaxing. Thanks for watching, and goodbye for now.